Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are cracking open a text that is less a historical accounting and more a piece of living scripture for one of the most controversial and powerful religious movements of the 20th century.
That's a crucial distinction to make right away.
Hmm.
We aren't looking at an outsider's critique or, a journalistic expose. We are analyzing the foundational narrative of the Unification Church, the UC, written by an absolute insider, Colonel Bo Hypak.
And during its most intense period?
Oh, absolutely. Its most intense period of global conflict and really persecution.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're diving into Pak's huge work, Messiah, My Life with Reverend Sun Myung Moon, Volume 1. It covers this really tumultuous decade, 1975 to 1985.
Right.
And our mission here is to pull out the core narrative of that period. I mean, this is a time when the movement just explodes in global visibility.
And at the exact same time, faces this relentless institutional persecution in the United States.
So our core question has to be, how did this key lieutenant, Colonel Pak, how did he write this history? How did he engineer a narrative where all these external attacks?
From congressional inquiries to federal imprisonment.
Right. How were those not seen as failures, but as theological validation?
It's fascinating because, like you said, we're reading a primary historical document that is also, it's a devotional chronicle. Pack isn't just recording the past. He's articulating what he sees as God's providence.
And that conviction, that one idea, just shapes everything. Our whole understanding of events like the massive anti-communist rallies, the Koreagate scandal.
And, of course, the landmark tax trial that sent Moon to prison.
To really get it, we have to start with the author, right? Of Colonel Bo Hypak. This guy wasn't just a dedicated member.
Not at all. He was Moon's shadow for 4 decades. He was the chief interpreter, the confidant, the global emissary. That proximity gives his text this just unparalleled authority inside the movement.
And when you read his account, what really stands out is this fusion of identities. He writes with the meticulous precision you'd expect from a military officer.
He was a colonel in the Korean military, after all.
Exactly. But he applies this white-hot zeal of an apostle to it.
Yes. He meticulously details logistical nightmares, financial planning, organizational charts. But then he uses military metaphors for everything.
Everything.
The unification movement is God's army. Every political opposition is the enemy. Moon is the commander-in-chief of Providence.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't just translate words. He sees himself as conveying divine battlefield revelation.
It totally transforms every political event into a stage for spiritual warfare. A congressional hearing isn't a review of finances.
It's a demonic attack.
Yeah.
And that framing, that's what creates the historical record for the insider.
So this whole military spiritual view is just baked into the architecture of Volume 1.
It is. It's mostly chronological, but it's constantly interrupted by these deep theological digressions. And those interruptions are critical because they ground a seemingly mundane event, a court filing, an acquisition in the ultimate stakes of their theology.
So it's an archive, too. He's exhaustive. He includes internal memos, full court transcripts, diary entries.
All of it designed to not only argue for the righteousness of the cause right then, but to create the official, authoritative history for posterity. He's documenting proof.
And that official history, it really hinges on a few fundamental theological concepts that just completely reframe reality.
Right. And if we're going to get into the core beliefs, we have to start with the central premise.
Yeah.
The identity of Sun Myung Moon himself.
He is presented as the perfected Adam. What does that actually mean in their theology, and why was it so important for what he was doing in the 70s?
Well, it means Moon is the Messiah. He's tasked with completing the mission that, in their view, Jesus Christ failed to complete. Jesus only established a spiritual foundation.
But not a physical one.
Exactly. He failed to establish the physical kingdom of heaven.
Yeah.
What they call the perfection of the four-position foundation, because he didn't establish a family.
Yeah.
So Moon's mission has to be political, social, and global.
So every rally, every investment, it's all a necessary step in completing God's providence. But if he's the Messiah, why all the persecution and suffering that just dominates this decade? Why so many setbacks?
That brings us to the second, and I'd argue most critical, concept for understanding Pak's book, indemnity or tangaik. This is the absolute necessity of paying a compensatory price for past historical failures.
It's the concept that lets suffering become strength.
Precisely.
Indemnifying what, though? What's the massive spiritual debt that's being paid?
Pak argues that Moon was enduring the price for the historical sins of Christianity and modern democracy. These institutions had rejected the Messiah before first Jesus, and now in their eyes, Moon. So the intense governmental and media scrutiny he faced was this indemnity.
Wow, I mean, that is an audacious claim. It just completely flips the narrative on its head.
It does.
The hostility of the establishment isn't a sign that the movement is flawed or doing something wrong.
No, it's proof they're doing everything right. So persecution becomes validation.
It's a circular logic, but it's also incredibly powerful for keeping people committed. The harder the struggle, the more divine it is.
And the closer they are to establishing God's kingdom. When you apply that logic, the U.S. government wasn't just investigating a tax filing. It was Satan trying to destroy Providence.
Which ties right into the geographical stakes. Pack's narrative puts the United States dead center in this cosmic drama. He calls America the second Israel.
Correct. America, founded on Christian ideals, was supposed to be the launch pad for global salvation. It was the best possible environment for the Messiah to launch his mission.
But Pack argues it had fallen into a deep spiritual decline.
Right. Secularism, moral decay, you name it.
So that decline makes the U.S. both the primary target for spiritual warfare, because communism, the satanic instrument, was on the rise.
And the necessary setting for this indemnity. The opposition Moon faced in Washington wasn't just random. It paralleled the rejection Jesus experienced in the first Israel. It elevates the whole American mission to an existential level.
And that lands us squarely in the mid-1970s with their massive PR campaign, the God Bless America rallies. This is where theology hits the street.
Yes, and these rallies are detailed heavily in the book. They were huge public events that married this religious fervor with a very strong anti-communist, conservative political motivation. Moon was warning the U.S. against spiritual decay.
But that explosive emergence basically coincided immediately with the government's full-scale scrutiny.
It did, culminating in the infamous Currygate investigation of 77 and 78, and Pack was right in the middle of it.
Deeply implicated, his background in military intelligence, his leadership of the Korean Cultural and Freedom Foundation, the KCFF.
Yeah, the Fraser Committee was investigating alleged South Korean influence peddling in Washington, and Pack was a central figure.
So how does Pack, in the book, handle the intense, detailed questioning from a U.S. congressional committee?
He dedicates pages and pages to it, but he almost never engages on their secular legal terms. He presents the entire process not as a legal inquiry into lobbying, but as a demonic persecution designed specifically to cripple God's providence.
He personalizes it. Chairman Donald Fraser isn't a politician doing his job.
No, he's framed as an unwitting tool of satanic forces. It's a huge leap for an organization under investigation, but it's completely consistent with their worldview.
So what was Pack's practical defense then? Beyond claiming spiritual persecution, he had to have a public counter-strategy.
He brilliantly used the cultural front as a shield.
Yeah.
He meticulously emphasized his involvement with the Little Angels Children's Folk Ballet, the KCFF's parent organization.
Ah, right.
He just stressed their mission was pure cultural exchange, anti-communist education, promoting Korean culture.
The message being, how could something so pure, a children's folk troupe, possibly be a front for nefarious political dealings?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was a very powerful PR defense. It helped them deflect the political accusations by emphasizing these high-minded cultural aims, even while the organization was deeply engaged in intense political mobilization.
And institution building. They were building big. Despite all the turmoil of Koreagate, the movement was also consolidating power, most visibly with the founding of a major newspaper.
Yes. Amidst all that heat, they founded the Washington Times in 1982. And Pack treats this as a direct, timely mandate from God.
I mean, launching a national paper in D.C. is an enormous undertaking. What was the strategic imperative?
It was created specifically to counter the falsehoods of the mainstream media, which they saw as Satan's mouthpiece. It was a weapon, really, a strategic effort to influence global discourse and support their conservative, anti-communist values.
So not just a business, but an ideological tool for information warfare.
Precisely. And the vast funds needed to do all this, the rallies, the foundations, the newspaper, that inevitably brought more legal scrutiny, which became the focus of the final defining conflict of Volume 1.
Right, their economic model was put on trial. How does Pack justify the need for these massive funds in his theology?
He links the need for these huge providential funds directly to the principles of tithing. In their worldview, finances are tools of salvation. He justifies the complex structures by pointing to the massive logistical feats required, like staging the 2075 couple blessing ceremony in 1982.
That's the proof that God requires substantial resources, and therefore the money is ecclesiastical.
That's the argument. And that brings us to the climax, the moment that defines the decade for Pak. Sun Myung Moon's tax evasion trial and his 13-month sentence at Danbury Prison.
From 1984 to 85, the legal record says he willfully filed false tax returns.
That is the external legal reality. But in the book, Pak executes this spectacular theological inversion. He says the trial wasn't about money. It was about religious liberty. He calls it a legal assassination.
What was the specific legal sticking point? The amount involved, $150,000, seems pretty small for a federal case.
The core argument was all about whether that money, held in Moon's name, was personal income or church property. Pak argued that in their theocratic structure, Moon and the church were inseparable. The funds were Providence's property, protected by the First Amendment.
And the court disagreed.
The court disagreed. It said he intentionally mixed personal and church accounts to evade taxes.
So by framing it as a First Amendment battle, they shifted the narrative from financial wrongdoing to religious persecution.
Absolutely. The Supreme Court's failure to hear the appeal is treated as this historic tragedy, confirming the American government's ultimate rejection of the Messiah. This is where Danbury becomes a modern-day Calvary.
A spiritual Calvary. And Pak reframes the imprisonment itself as the ultimate passion narrative, the final indemnity.
Exactly. Moon's suffering served a critical sacrificial purpose. It indemnified the sins of American Christianity for failing to recognize him. The sacrifice, according to Pak, cleansed American soil so that the Providence could continue.
And Pak describes Moon's behavior in prison with intensely hagiographical detail.
Oh, yeah. He details Moon transforming Danbury into a heavenly training center. He describes him counseling inmates, studying tirelessly, demonstrating this messianic resilience through humility. It wasn't a defeat. It was a proving ground.
And the movement didn't just sit back. They used the imprisonment as a rallying point.
They mobilized a massive interfaith campaign, the American Clergy Leadership Conference on Religious Freedom. They got mainstream clergy evangelical pastors, Orthodox rabbis, to visit Moon and advocate for his release.
A very strategic move. By getting external leaders involved, they framed it not as an attack on the UC,
but as a threat to all religious groups. It established their identity through this shared sense of martyrdom and constitutional defense.
So if we look back at the legacy of Messiah, Volume 1, it really defined the Unification Church's core identity through this comprehensive martyrdom narrative. Persecution became a necessary foundational element.
And critically, Pak's work elevated Moon's political pronouncements during this decade to the status of continuing revelation. Every setback, every legal loss, was immediately reframed not as a failure of strategy, but as a necessary step ordained by heaven.
It's such a powerful internal feedback loop. It just reinforces conviction no matter what external reality looks like. If you consider the massive scope of the claim, that the entire 6,000-year history of restoration hinged on the American mission during this specific decade.
And that the American establishment actively tried to dismantle it. Well, that perspective teaches us something profound about the power of conviction in shaping and maybe distorting historical reality. Pak created a narrative where opposition is the ultimate proof of divine election. If you're reading this as an insider, you're never defeated. You're simply paying a higher spiritual price. The question for you is, if the only measure of success is the intensity of your opposition, what does that demand of an organization striving for global influence?